I've been called crazy for this so many times by so many people everywhere, by friends, by people on the internet. But you have to be in on Shohei Ohtani next offseason because there's simply no one else you can be in on. There's Aaron Nola, who has really struggled this season. Julio Urias, who I don't believe is real. And then after that, it's just Shohei Ohtani. He's the only starting pitcher on the market that I think is worth going after for the Cardinals. He, as a DH this season, is probably one of the most clutch hitters in baseball. He is probably the best hitter in the American League right now. And if you sign him to what I have written down to a 12-year, $620 million deal, which is what I think is what he deserves to get and what he probably would get on the open market, I think that's a worthy sacrifice. You mentioned Paul Goldschmidt being a franchise player, but you know what's Shohei Ohtani is more than anything Paul Goldschmidt could become. He's going to bring in an entire new generation.
It's going to cost 3 times what Goldschmidt costs.
You're getting two players. You're getting two players in one, and then
two players in one. And if one of them gets hurt, they both get hurt. They're tied together.
You're getting an entire nation of new Cardinal fans. An entire country is going to be Cardinal fans. They're going to be wearing these Cardinal hats. They're going to be going around and representing your team. Do you know how many people in Japan own Angels gear right now?
Sure. If you could get rid of Paul Goldschmidt and ensure that the Cardinals got Shohei Ohtani, I would do it. I would probably do it. But I don't think
I'm not saying that that has to be. Ideally, you keep both of them. But if you want even a chance at getting Shohei Ohtani, you have to let one of your big payroll guys go. Wainwright is going to be off the books. He's making like 17 million. Goldschmidt is on for 26 million next year. DeYoung, you decline his option, that's 9 million. And then the payroll was going to increase anyway. So Ohtani, if you pay him, say like 60, $55 million next year, which is what I had outlined for that deal, you still have enough payroll to go out and add a little bit more, like another pitcher or two. And I think this Cardinal team has enough young talent and enough foundation to win ball games and to be a legitimate World Series contender by adding someone, even with that much payroll. And I understand if Shohei Ohtani gets hurt, right? That's disastrous for your team. But think about what he does for you. Yeah. Think about what that does for you if he doesn't get hurt. If he doesn't get hurt, then the Cardinals, in terms of the worldwide recognition, become like the Dodgers and the Yankees. Everyone is going to be wanting these hats, these jerseys. Everyone is going to be representing your team because there's really never been anyone else like Shohei Ohtani. No one has the talent that he has. And no one in baseball, I think, has been as non-controversial as him. Like you look at Bryce Harper, you look at Manny Machado, certain guys that the Cardinals haven't gone after because they're controversial figures like Carlos Correa. We were never going to be in on him because of the cheating scandal, but Shohei Ohtani has none of that behind him. He's probably the most loved player by most fans. And I'm not saying that because he's my favorite player and because I like having him in fantasy and he wins me championships. I'm saying that because that's what I've seen from the fans in Japan, from the fans in Anaheim, from the fans when he came to Busch Stadium and the Cardinals were like 10 games under 500 in May. They still came out to see this one player. And you're going to generate so much revenue and this team will become like more than anything DeWitt could probably imagine. And if he's not in on him, then he's overlooking that fact.
I think Shohei Ohtani, sure, while he could generate you revenue, I'm not sure that one player will generate you revenue on the scale that would be required to completely overhaul the way the Cardinals have approached free agency for their entire history. The Cardinals have had generational players. The Cardinals had Albert Pujols, who had a 10-year stretch that was probably one of the greatest 10-year stretches of any power hitter ever. If you go look at his first 10 years in St. Louis, those numbers are pretty much unmatched in baseball history. There's a reason that Pujols could spend 10 years pretty much wasting away in Anaheim and still hit 700 home runs, right? Like he did some unreal things in St. Louis, and that wasn't able to change the way the Cardinals approach spending. Also, I think even if you get all these guys off the books, that pales in comparison to the amount of money Shohei Ohtani is going to cost you because it's a long-term investment. Sure, you might be able to clear $50 million in 1 year. You might be able to clear $50 million from year one by getting rid of Goldschmidt, by getting rid of Wainwright. But these are all short-term things that carry very little risk for the Cardinals. Even if Adam Wainwright had been hurt all season and hadn't suited up, it wasn't going to hurt us next year. It was just going to hurt for this 1 year. And it was going to be like, we really wanted to see Adam Wainwright pitch and we gave him $18 million and we probably could have gotten away giving him $6 million. But I digress. That move is starting to bother me. But whatever the case, this is going to be 12 plus years. You also look at the way the market overperformed last offseason. Guys like Trey Turner were getting locked up for 13, 14 years. That's crazy. Yu Darvish just got signed through his age 42 or 43 season. Teams are now more willing to give years than ever before. There are going to be teams, I have the opinion at least, that teams are going to offer Shohei 13 to 15 years at some point in time. Sure, Shohei might not want that many years, but I think if the Dodgers or the Mets or the Padres come calling, and they look at free agency very differently from the way the Cardinals do. But if they come calling and they say, hey, how about $60 million a year for 13 years? There's no way the Cardinals could do anything to beat that offer. Also, even if the Cardinals do sign Shohei Ohtani, that's a contract that they can't stand up under if it doesn't carry its own weight. Christian Yelich's deal was 7 years, $188 million. And that's a deal right now that a lot of people in Milwaukee really, really regret. And it's really hurting their franchise. It hurts their ability to spend. It hurts their ability to do just about anything. And Christian Yelich hasn't even been that bad. He's playing. He's not hurt. If Shohei Ohtani somehow busts over the life of this contract, which sure, it's not the most likely thing in the world, but if he does, the Cardinals couldn't stand up under this for the next decade and a half. It would really, really hamper their ability to do anything other than lose 100 games a year.
You think the Dodgers or the Mets are going to give Shohei Ohtani like 13 years and $780 million? Do you think that's possible?
I'm not going 780, but I think they could give him 13 years, 660.
I mean, if teams were comfortable giving Bryce Harper 13 years, I think it's ridiculous to say that they wouldn't be comfortable giving Shohei 13 years. And, of course, it would be more money per year than what Bryce got. But you want to lock up that kind of player. And yes, injury can happen, but injury can happen to any player. And yes, I hear what you're saying about, if the batter gets injured, then the hitter gets injured, or then the pitcher gets injured as well. But that's just a risk that you're going to have to take for a guy like Shohei Ohtani. I mean, by the end of his career, I think a lot of people are going to be saying he's the best baseball player of all time. And Sandy, if you are that concerned about keeping Goldschmidt as a Cardinal for the sake of, having him in the Hall of Fame wearing the Cardinal uniform, I think it's a massive opportunity to get one of the best baseball players of all time, if not ultimately the best baseball player of all time in a Cardinal uniform.
I agree with that. That's why I said earlier, if I could just get rid of Goldschmidt and bring in Shohei Ohtani, absolutely, I would do that. But I don't think getting rid of Goldschmidt even brings in Ohtani, because Goldschmidt's $26 million next year are pennies on the dollar to what Shohei will cost. Clearing that money doesn't just mean that Grandpa Bill DeWitt, stingy old Grandpa Bill, is going to immediately sign Shohei Ohtani. I mean, it would require a completely different concept of how the Cardinals approach free agency. It would require the entire organization to rethink the way it looks at money and revenue and payroll. And Goldschmidt doesn't do that. I mean, it'd be a very small thing. I think if the Cardinals get rid of Goldschmidt, it changes absolutely nothing about how likely they are to sign Ohtani, because you'd have to be completely all in on spending a ton of money on this team.
You mentioned Albert Pujols, who, he's one of the greatest hitters of all time. And he's definitely one of the best Cardinals of all time. But Albert Pujols was never an international star. Like he's Dominican, and there's a lot of players from the Dominican that have really shined in the US in the major leagues. And he might be one of the best Dominican players ever, but he's not the guy. He's not their guy. He was never going to sell that many jerseys outside of St. Louis. It was never really going to happen. But Shohei Ohtani is Japan's guy. Other than Ichiro, that is it. There is no one else that you can even compare him to. And Japan is so much more passionate about baseball. We've seen the WBC. We've seen how those fans show up. And if you get that entire country, it's just completely different from any other player you can even compare him to. And for what I've projected, for what I've laid out, $620 million over what did I say? 12 years?
12 years.
I would say you pay him $65 million next year, right? And let's say Goldschmidt's contract is for 26. Let's say we pay the hitter Shohei Ohtani $26 million, which is probably not what he's worth. Because I would argue that currently Shohei Ohtani is a better hitter. Then you're paying the pitcher $39 million, which is worth it. That's what 40-year-old Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, they're getting more. Sure. So if you
well,
want,
Verlander's also won like 3 Cy Youngs and an MVP. And was coming off a season that was a lot better than Shohei's season last year. Like, I understand why Verlander got that money for 1 year. The problem is we're talking stretched out. Like, you're talking about Verlander's AAV. Yeah, if we want to talk AAV, if I could sign Shohei Ohtani to a 3-year, $75 million per year deal, I would do that. Like, if I was the Cardinals and I could get him on a very short-term deal, absolutely, I would do that. But you're talking long-term. You're talking a number exceeding $600 million. The Yankees just signed Aaron Judge to a $400 million deal that was like unprecedented. You think the Cardinals are going to go spend 1.5 times that money on one player? The Cardinals have never spent more than $90 million on a free agent from outside the organization. Contreras was the all-time record. Shohei Ohtani would require septupling that number. Like, we're talking times 7. I just don't think it's realistic. And that's why, for me, like, yeah, if we could do it, I would. I'm not going to debate the merits of signing Ohtani. Absolutely. Go sign Shohei Ohtani. But Grandpa Bill, he's not going to do that. Bill DeWitt is not going to put up that kind of money. And that's why, for me, Goldschmidt has to stay. And you got to, he's the best hitter we're going to be able to get anyway. No one's going to be able to fill that void in the lineup because we can't get Shohei Ohtani. He can't come to St. Louis. It's just not possible.
I also think the fact that we were in on Juan Soto is at least an indication that we might dabble our feet in the water of the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes.
Sure.
Now, obviously, we didn't end up getting him, and I'd be shocked if the Cardinals end up being the team to sign him. And, that's not going to happen. And so for the same reasons, I really think that Shohei is extremely unlikely. I think he's going to stay on the West Coast somewhere, or I can, of course, see the Mets. But the Padres clearly don't care about how much money they spend. And I think that there are so many teams, like you said, Sandy, that are going to be much more willing to write him a blank check.
Yeah, there are just other teams that can write off that kind of money. Like, if Shohei Ohtani gets hurt, the Yankees can survive that. And I know, injury, like Xavier said earlier, you can't control it. It's risk that you take on, and you have to take on some amount of risk. And I agree with that. But think about the Boston Red Sox when they signed Patrick Sandoval, or Pablo Sandoval, not Patrick. Patrick's the Pablo Sandoval. When he signs with the Red Sox after the 2014 World Series, he was awful. In the first year of that deal, he was terrible. And he was so bad in the second year that they took that eight-year deal worth over $200 million. And they just said, oh, we'll just pay the money. Who cares? And they just cut him. And they said, bye-bye. They were paying him to play for another organization. The Cardinals will never do that. Look at how long they strung out the Dexter Fowler deal, just hoping that something would happen. Look at how long they have strung out the Steven Matz deal. Any other team at this point would have been like, you know what? You're hurt all of the first year. Now you're incompetent in the rotation, and we put you in the bullpen and you can't even pitch. Steven Matz can't even pitch out of the bullpen effectively. Any other team would be done. Any other team would have been done with Luke Gregerson, Brett Cecil, Andrew Miller, long before the Cardinals were done. Paul DeYoung is another name here. The Cardinals, they just simply believe, and whether it's true or not, they believe that they can't let people go when things don't work out. And so that's why there's no way they would ever take on the risk of even a $300 million contract. I'm not sure we'll ever see the Cardinals sign a deal bigger than $300 million because they just don't approach risk that way. At least with the current construction of their front office and ownership group. Sure, if a billionaire bought the Cardinals, it would change everything. Uncle Steve, please sell the Mets and come here. But it's never going to happen. The Cardinals, as currently constructed, don't view risk the same way those other teams do.